Today, I'd like to talk about identity. Um, Something I've always had, I would say, sort of at the center of my life, is my struggle to find an identity. I can think as far back as when I was a kid, and that question you get as a kid, which is like, what are you going to be when you grow up? I remember that being the most important question. Like, even anything could be, in my mind, anything could be filtered through that question, where it's just like, one of the things I wanted to be was a veterinarian. And I remember thinking as a kid, like, I'm picking veterinarian because I love animals and that defines who I am. But it wasn't because, like, I was drawn to the animals. It was because I was so desperately seeking something that I could define myself by. And the thing that I seemed to be in juxtaposition against my, like, siblings, for example, was that I had a deeper fondness for animals. So something like that, where the my attachment to identity when I was a kid was like defining myself in opposition to what I saw around me. But that doesn't necessarily explain why I was so attached to this idea of needing an identity in the first place. You know, I could make a few guesses. My first guess would be that I grew up sort of traditionally as a gifted child. I was ahead of my, but since such a young age. I mean, like, we're talking 3 and 4 years old. I'm able to speak and read, and I remember some of my earliest memories are me like reading to a class of people who can't read, and like my teachers and parents really encouraging this notion of like specialness. So if I had to guess, my a lot of the attachment to identity comes from reinforcement of the idea that the only thing I could be is like special or better, like that there was no homogeny for, like, there's no sense of me being one of the pack. So then that became my attachment. So it's like, okay, what I know about the world is that the world exists and there's this other, and I'm not part of that. And it's super important for some reason that I'm not part of that. And there's a lot of positive reinforcement around that, around just, telling me that I'm special. So that'd be my first guess. I think just in general, my second guess is that our culture has a lot to do with that. The notion of needing an identity is like enforced on everything. It's enforced in all the media you consume. You think about every single movie you've ever seen. The main character is the main character, typically speaking, because they are unique. It's very even media that portrays like an everyman as the main character is still ultimately saying like this person exists in juxtaposition to everything else. It like really enforces the notion of a self. None of that's really here nor there. The reason it's been on my mind is because it's been so extremely prevalent in my life, trying to figure out what the hell who I am, like what I'm going to do with my life, that kind of thing. But I've had some very extremely deeply conscious altering experiences where I've had ego death and I've experienced the complete loss of self and like total destruction of my ego. And I ultimately, my spiritual belief is that the universe, everything that exists, is just one thing, that we are one existence, so to speak, and that like the only thing that you are separate is your perspective, your perception of us as a total unit. So it's effectively like I'm not separate from the totality, but I am only a part of the totality. But I also don't like the idea of like it's a part. It's not. That's not necessarily what the thing is. It's more like I'm the best metaphor I could come up with is like I'm a set of eyes for the universe. Like one of the like it's difficult to talk about without getting like very deep into my my tangled web of spirituality. But the point is that I, at a very base level, don't agree with the notion that I am anything separate or unique, that there has to be a me. I have largely accepted that that is all ego talking. Like, it's an attachment to identity because the ego is trying to attach itself to something so that it can exist. Because if you get if you grasp that your ego is its own thing and that it doesn't really exist, it has to kind of fight you for survival, and it does so in very like clever ways. And I'll get into ego a bit more later on. The point is more that like my deeper spiritual beliefs don't line up with the way I practically conduct my life. And so that's been on my mind a lot lately. Specifically, I noticed that I keep coming back to this notion of like, what am I doing right now? Shouldn't I be doing something else? And I think I've already talked a bit about this, but the idea is that like I'll be, sitting around doing nothing. I'll consider myself bored, but I'll like, man, I don't necessarily have the motivation to do something else that I consider to be more important. So if I'm sitting around watching TV, my brain will be like, well, all this time you're sitting here watching TV, you're not in the gym, you're not practicing an instrument, you're not learning a new language. And but then, the counter argument that my brain also comes up with is like, well, which is it going to be? What are you going to do? And there's too many options, and so because of that, you're paralyzed and you can't do anything. Because if you start, let's say, whatever you do, you're sacrificing that time. If I spend 10 hours playing piano, that's 10 hours that I'm not working out, or that's 10 hours that I'm not reading or studying. And so you get into this, I get into this kind of repetitive mindset, which is just like, what is the most important thing for me to be doing right now? What should I do? What should I do with my life? Which direction should I go? And all of that's fine, except that like at the core level, I believe in the rejection of that. I think we should reject identity. I think we should reject the notion of planning out some grand goal and then achieving that. I don't necessarily think you can't achieve your goals, but I do think more important than like saying in the future, I want to be a doctor who's got a six-pack and can play 10 instruments, is like, in about an hour from now, I would like to have spent some time doing this. Like, the focus really needs to be pretty granular, and if you can't be in the present moment, at least in the very near future. And part of that's like from practical experience. You just simply can't live your life in a several year long time frame. It's tricky because I don't want to say that you shouldn't plan bigger things and you shouldn't plan for things that take years or take entire lifetimes. That's not my point. My point is, one thing, you don't know what's going to happen. I could, dream of being a famous track star, but if I get hit by a car and lose my legs, does that mean that the person that I was is different now? Have I lost an identity because I built my identity on a guy who is going to run, and I no longer have that option? So am I no longer a person? And so you can see how that kind of falls apart looking at such a long time frame. And I'm not saying that things can't happen, or that things will go badly, or things will even change. That's not the point either. The point is more, the most succinct way I can say it is like, don't have a goal, have a direction. That to me makes the most sense. It's like, I know generally speaking, my goals in life. They are generally to be a creative person, as in like make art, make stuff, explore my creative side, help people, and specifically if I can help people in like in a psychological way. So for me, that I get this sense where I'm like, okay, well then what I want to do is be a famous psychotherapist or something like that. But then a more core part of myself says, okay, you shouldn't be planning out that far. Instead, you should just say, okay, what do I have to do next if that's my goal? And you can kind of pace that out. Like, I've been working on pacing a bit too. It's just like, how fast am I living my life? Like, am I stressing all the time and trying to do a bunch, or am I like not stressing enough? Am I barely moving? And I've been lately erring on the side of I should go slower. I should sit and meditate more. Should go outside, and I do. I go for walks, and I take my life very slowly. I make myself tea. Like, I have this nice chamomile tea, which, let's see if it is too hot still. Yeah, definitely way too hot still. So but despite knowing all this, despite knowing that I want to take my life slower, that I want to live more presently, that I want to not want as much, my goal is to experience life at in the present moment, just take life for what it is. Despite that, I keep finding myself running back to my old patterns of who am I? And this has been on my mind since I was a kid, and like most of the time I'm thinking about it. I would say, if I had to guess, I would say a majority of my time is spent thinking about who I am, on like what I'm going to be. And my guesses for my identity all stem from like childhood. That's the best I can do with like trying to figure out who why I'm so attached to the idea of identity. It's tricky too, because part of me wants to go, okay, well in that case I'll just reject identity and that will be who I am. Did you hear it? Did you hear me reject identity and then not reject the identity about rejecting identity? So it's you get into this, like, that's what you become attached to. Then you become attached to this notion of like, and your brain will dress it up. You'll be like, oh yes, I am a Zen monk now. I've reached enlightenment. I am this, and you keep saying I am. Therefore, you are still attached to an identity. So it's very difficult. I don't know how practical it is to do it most of the time. Definitely not all the time. I would assume that you can't. I would assume even monks, even those who dedicate their lives to the rejection of identity, couldn't do it all the time. That there would still be, just by way of being a human, there's no way to avoid identity completely. But I would argue that it would only be a benefit to work on rejecting identity more often. And I would say the most like obvious benefit is there's this mantra I've been using lately. It's you are under no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago. And that it's really become a mindfulness tactic for me, where it's just like, I'll start doing something that like I don't even really want to do. I'll just start watching. I'll start scrolling on social media or something like that, and I'll just start doing it. And like, even as soon as I got on it, I was like, man, I was just on this 5 minutes ago. I didn't see anything then that I liked. It wasn't helpful for me. I'm just doing it because my brain is searching for something to do. And before, I think I would have just spent a lot more time just doom scrolling and doing that. But then, if the mantras, I say it as often as I can, because then it'll like ring in my head, and it's, you're under no obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago. So then, as soon as that pops back up into my head, I'm like, oh, I can just not I know I clicked on the button. I know I started this episode of this show. I know that I started to do something. I got dressed and I got in my car to go pick up fast food. But I don't have to see it through just because I started it. And that runs at odds with something else that, like, you know, I taught myself to see things through, but you don't have to. And understanding how to use that but not abuse it I've been working on lately too. Because I you know, the flip side of that is like, what if you start doing something that's difficult but that you want, that is true to what you want in the moment? So like, art is very difficult, drawing is very difficult. I animate, and oftentimes I will start animating, and 2 minutes in I'm like, this is way tougher than I want for a challenge right now. And sometimes I just genuinely need to take a break and not do it. And sometimes I can't do it, but I have to be careful because my brain now has, you know, it's all ego, and it's all your mind, as opposed to like who you are underneath your mind. Your mind will make use of anything in its wake. So anything you've said, you know, any thought you've had, your brain can use that against you. So even though there's a true part of you that's you know, the part of the mindfulness part of saying like, you're not under obligation to be who you were 5 minutes ago. The mindfulness part is just saying that so that you can relax and you can stop attaching identity to everything you do, so that way you can not be stuck. But your brain will be like, oh, I can use that to protect my identity, actually, and I can use that to not be put out of my comfort zone. Well, yeah, you shouldn't be working hard right now because you're not under obligation to work hard right now. And your brain is very clever. It's more convincing. It is the most convincing thing in your life, is your own brain. It by definition has to be. It knows every argument that would work on you because it knows everything that you think. And that's, you know, that's another way of dealing with identity, is to just accept it as it's just separate from you. You know, what you truly are is just the entire universe. And this is all my own spiritual beliefs that are informed by my experience. But like, which is kind of funny because my experience dictates that there is no my experience, that it is actually just, we are just one thing that is happening or is happening, you know. It can get kind of tricky. That's, you know, that would be for me, if there is a me, the most frustrating part about life is like, my main concern is identity. The main answer is that like, I will never and can never have a real identity other than I am, whatever I am in that moment. You can prove this to yourself. It's pretty easy. It's like when you, I stole this from Dr. K on YouTube. It's like, when you take a shit, who are you? Are you the person you are at your job? Are you a student? Are you an artist? And it's like, no, you're just a guy taking a shit. And like, you can think as often as you can think about that. That's what you are. So every time you have that question of who am I, the right answer is to just kind of look around and look at what you're, you know, I'm a guy sitting in a chair asking, who am I? Like, and that's it. There's no, despite what you're capable of, because that's a different thing entirely. Like, you might be capable of performing brain surgery, but you're not a brain surgeon when you're taking a shit. You're just taking a shit. So I suppose that's all I had to say on identity. It's, you know, I think it's kind of funny too. If you know the Enneagram test, it's this psychology test. It's similar to like Myers-Briggs. It's personality. And they divide people into like I think it's 9 groups with each have 2 subgroups, so you could have like a total of, well, I was gonna say 18, but I think you can actually just be the thing with no subgroup, so 27. But and I find it to be super accurate. If you read into it, it's very well detailed. It's definitely, for me, if you're like interested in personality stuff at all, it's the only one that actually has any meaningful data. The whole point of it is just to tell you like your personality subtype, like what things you might be attuned to, what things would be like if you were unhealthy, what kind of unhealthy traits you might exhibit, and if you were very healthy, what kind of healthy traits you would exhibit. And it's supposed to be a tool for a psychologist to help people of different personalities understand things and grow. And it's funny because the subtype that I get, and I took this test when I was like in high school, and I got the same thing as when I was in college, and I got the same thing years after that when I was in the military. Like, I get the same thing every time. And before I even took it, I read it and I was like, that's going to be the one. And you can, I tried this out with a bunch of people. I would like predict which ones they were going to get just based off their personality. And that's why I espouse it, because it's very accurate and a very, very, very well written system. But the one I am, for Wing 3, if you do it, it's the one about this person. It's completely about self-expression and identity. So when I'm searching for like, I'm taking this personality test, obviously because I'm like searching for an identity. I'm like, what is my identity? Who am I? Like, and that's the whole point of, I think, why people like personality tests. Like, they just want to affirm who they are. And I take it and it's like, you're the type of personality who is desperate to know what your personality is. And it's like, God, that's brutal. So yeah, it's the identity about identity. And so like, I find myself in a lot of meta thought and a lot of just meta thinking in general, where it's just like my thoughts about thoughts, and it's a little pretentious. And I often am trying to move to a more simple life and just like more presence of mind, more doing things. I think I have that fantasy that many men tend to have, and I'm sure plenty of women have it as well, but of just like going and living alone in the woods, like building a log cabin and living off the land. I'm certain I'm not alone in having that fantasy, but I think what appeals about that to me is it's very removed from like conscious thought. Because if anything, I've always been, and see, I've been, this is who I am, but if anything, over-analytical could describe me, which, part of it is just accepting, like, I like to analyze, I like to break apart concepts in my head, I like very complicated storylines, like it makes sense to me, and I enjoy it, so I'm not necessarily upset about that or trying to change that about myself. I like that I am perceived as a complicated person and that I feel like a complicated person. Of course, the issue with that is that I can be complicated, and so it's difficult to understand myself and difficult to figure out who I am, and then when I'm like, okay, I want to reject who I am completely, it's like a practical moment to moment. How does that work? How do you reject identity? And, so much, I'm not even getting into like how social media essentially forces you to attach to an identity. And it's like, what the ego is, if we were to look at it, it's just a comparison machine. Literally, the only thing the ego really does is compare you to other people, or you to what you want, or compares things it wants. It's a comparison machine. And if your ego is like, if you don't know anything about ego, you might just be like, that person has a nice car, I want a nice car. But then you get a little more conscious and you're like, oh, it's my ego that wants a nice car, and that and so I'm better than people who don't know that their ego's controlling them. But you don't realize what just happened. Your ego just pulled a sneaky move. It's like, okay, this guy's a little more complicated. If I just say things to him like, I want a nice car, he's going to catch on. And as soon as you catch on to your ego, it goes away. In the moment, it'll come back, and it's clever, so it'll come back even sneakier. And that's what I'm talking about. It'll pull this move where it's like, okay, this guy's on to me. So what I need to do is make him attached to the idea of being on to me. Make him think he's so smart because he's aware of his own ego. And it's like, that's still ego. And the only difference between your ego and someone who is not aware of their own ego is that your comparison machine is more complicated because that's how it keeps you from catching on. So to me, it's very difficult to get over that, because every time you recognize that kind of thing about yourself, and which is, I'm saying, is the goal, like you could be, I see, and saying you should be is also kind of iffy in my worldview, which is like, should you be anything? And I'm kind of saying, no, you shouldn't be anything. You just are whatever you are, moment to moment. But that's sort of the premise that I'm working with here, is that like your ego is going to just keep getting more complicated to avoid you really realizing that it's the ego talking most of the time. So that's really, like, I think that's the best I can do for now. I am going to obviously keep addressing it, and the only reason it's been on my mind is because, like, I have been very harsh on myself lately for not doing things that, not showing up for myself, or like doing things that I feel like betray what I really want out of life and my longer term goals. But then the whole point was that, like, okay, is that me betraying myself, or is that me attaching to this idea of who I will be in the future instead of existing as I am now, and like just going in the direction that I want to go as opposed to going towards something specific. So it's just been on my mind lately. I got about 5 minutes left, so let's see. I have a list. Let me see if there's anything on here that I can talk about in 5 minutes. Actually, I seem to have covered a lot of the stuff on this list just kind of by accident. I forgot that I had written this. Yeah, or at least written these things. I'm trying to read my handwriting. It's god awful. I have some exams tomorrow and the day after, and I haven't studied at all. I'm going to tomorrow morning, because the exam's not till later in the evening, and then probably after that. And I put it off. I just like, this is even like shorter than, I only gave myself 30 minutes to talk here, but I really wanted to do like a few hours and really get deep into my thoughts and like play some Zelda. And that's part of the reason this whole identity thing has been on my mind, is because like every couple of minutes, during the whole time, and I'm not saying I did nothing. I cooked for myself. I got ready for the week. I did stuff. I just, like, the one thing I really needed to do, and I also didn't do nothing study wise. I put together some study guides. I'm prepared that, like, provided nothing goes crazy at work tomorrow, I'll be fine. I'll get to study. But it was different than the plan I had set out going into the weekend. And so I've just been kind of analyzing that, like, what is controlling me, what is controlling my energy, what's pushing me to be more on television or YouTube, like, than like just you're reading a book, or like doing my work, studying, that kind of stuff. Um, and so there's a bit of like energy management stuff that I've been working on. I had a bit. I've been changing my diet a bit. I've been like not aggressively changing my sleep, but just like changing my sleep bit by bit, and just different stuff like that. Where I think I'm having issues. I think my issues, like feeling good for most of the day, really stem from just like very basic decisions I'm making. And so like I'm more conscious of it, and I'm working more on the stuff I can do about it. So that's pretty much the only other thing that's been on my mind. I kind of, at a low level, thinking about like dating and a social life is always on my mind as well. But I've largely solved that problem, like, as much as I can. I try and spend time with the people here that I know, but like I'm trying to expand my social group, but that's really not going to happen. I've got my tests and like final projects due in the next 2 weeks, and I don't go out for my volleyball club till the end of the month. So it's solved, but there's still a part of me that's like, okay, you haven't really done anything to like improve your social life. It's like you just have to. I have to be patient. There's not a whole lot else I could do without sacrificing stuff in my life that I don't want to do, and just being open to it in general, day to day. Like I just don't run into a whole lot of people, so like I don't really have a whole lot of problem talking to strangers. I just don't meet a whole lot of strangers in the day. But I think that's good for now. That definitely, I really only wanted to do this so that even though I just ran into this exact same problem, where I was just like, I didn't leave myself enough time to really get it deep and really explore my thoughts. But I still want to do this. I still want to journal. It's still important that I start speaking my mind. So I'm glad that I took the time. I'm glad that I set 30 minutes for myself and just did it. So thank you for listening. See ya.